All right, so
Yeah.
today we're going to be diving into something pretty intense, the Book of Revelation.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I know when people think about Revelation,
Mm,
they kind of think about this like puzzle box of crazy visions, strange symbols.
right.
Um, but what if I told you it's actually a deeply personal message?
Okay.
Like a letter from Jesus himself,
Yeah.
meant specifically for you.
That's a great way to put it, I think,
Yeah.
because uh, Revelation's not really like other books in the Bible.
Right.
It's not a straightforward story or anything.
Yeah.
It's more like this tapestry of, you know, vivid imagery and prophecies and letters all woven together.
And the source material that we're looking at today focuses on like the first 3 chapters.
Yeah, the foundation.
Yeah.
The foundation for everything else that comes later.
And I think woven into these sources is a personal testimony that I found really powerful.
Oh, yeah.
This person described how reading Revelation completely transformed their life. It's like they suddenly felt this incredible urgency.
Yeah.
Like God was speaking directly to them through the text.
Yeah.
And it really makes you wonder, like, what message might be hidden in these chapters for us.
I think to uncover that, we need to start with probably the most striking element of it all.
Okay.
The vision of Christ in chapter 1,
Okay.
verses 9 through 20, just paint this image that's both awe-inspiring and honestly a bit terrifying.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I first read about Jesus with eyes like blazing fire and a voice like rushing water,
Right.
it wasn't exactly the peaceful image I was used to.
Yeah.
It's almost like seeing a completely different side of him.
And I think that's the point.
Right.
This isn't the Jesus of, gentle parables and quiet miracles.
Right.
This is the risen Christ, the King of Kings. He holds the keys to death and Hades.
Whoa.
It's a vision meant to shake us out of our complacency and make us realize the sheer power and authority of the figure we're dealing with here.
Yeah, and for me, it's both terrifying and strangely comforting at the same time.
Oh, interesting.
Like on the one hand, this overwhelming display of power,
Right.
but on the other hand, it's a reminder that even death itself is under his control.
I think that's a fascinating observation, and it really speaks to just the complexity of Revelation itself.
Yeah.
It's a book that evokes, a whole spectrum of emotions: fear, awe, hope, even confusion.
Right.
But one thing's clear: it demands our attention.
Absolutely. And it's even more fascinating when we consider the context in which this vision was received.
Okay.
John the author was exiled on the island of Patmos,
Right.
essentially imprisoned for his faith.
It's not just a simple exile.
Yeah.
You think about the Jewish concept of Hester Panem,
Okay.
the idea of God's hidden face. It's during times of hardship and exile, when God seems most absent,
Right.
that people often experience the most profound encounters with the divine.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like
Yeah.
that. So you're saying John's exile might have actually sharpened his spiritual perception, allowing him to see this incredibly intense vision of Christ.
Exactly. It's like being stripped of everything else forces you to see things in a whole new light.
Wow.
Maybe that's why Revelation is so rich with symbolism and imagery.
Right.
It's a language born out of suffering and exile, a way of expressing the inexpressible.
It makes so much sense, those intense experiences,
Yeah.
The ones that push us to our limits can sometimes open us up to a deeper understanding of God that we never knew existed.
Absolutely.
But let's move on to chapters 2 and 3,
Okay.
where we find those letters addressed to the 7 churches.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see how this idea of exile and intense spiritual vision
Right.
plays into those messages.
Well, each letter is unique, tailored to the specific struggles and triumphs of each church. But running through all of them is this theme of perseverance, of overcoming in the face of persecution and temptation.
And the word overcoming is used quite a bit in Revelation.
Right.
But it's not just about winning battles or defeating enemies, is it?
No, it's much deeper than that. Think about the historical context. Christians at this time were facing real persecution.
Right.
They were being exiled, imprisoned, even killed for their faith.
Wow.
So overcoming in this context means remaining faithful even in the face of unimaginable suffering.
Yeah.
It's about holding on to hope when everything around you seems to be crumbling.
That puts a whole new spin on those letters.
Yeah.
It's not just about correcting theological errors or moral failings,
Right.
but it's about offering encouragement and strength to those who are struggling to simply survive.
Precisely. And I think that's why those letters still resonate with us today, even though we may not be facing the same kind of persecution.
Right.
We all face challenges and trials in our lives, things that test our faith and make us question everything.
So if these letters were tailored for specific churches, how do we know which message applies to us today?
Well, I think that's part of the beauty of Revelation. It invites us to find our own personal message within its pages. It's like holding up a mirror to our own hearts and asking, where am I struggling? What temptations am I facing? What areas of my life need to be overcome
Yeah.
so I can truly live out my faith?
I love that analogy of a mirror.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking back to that personal testimony we mentioned earlier.
Right.
The person whose life was transformed
Yes.
by reading Revelation. Maybe they saw something in those letters
Right.
that resonated deeply with their own struggles, something that gave them the strength to keep going.
Absolutely. It's like those letters are like a series of diagnoses and prescriptions for the soul.
Okay.
They pinpoint our weaknesses, our blind spots, but they also offer a path forward, a way to heal and grow.
Okay, so let's try holding up that mirror ourselves.
All right.
Out of all the letters to the 7 churches, which one stands out to you as particularly relevant for, say, someone like me?
Oh.
Someone who's trying to navigate the complexities of modern life and stay true to their faith.
That's a great question. Knowing your love for deep conversations and your tendency to overthink things. I'd say the letter to the church in Ephesus
Okay.
might be a good place to start. Remember how Jesus calls them out for losing their first love?
Yeah, I remember that part, but what does that actually look like in practice?
Right.
How do you lose your first love for God?
Well, think about it like any relationship.
Okay.
In the beginning, there's this intense passion, this excitement, this desire to spend all your time with the other person. But over time, that initial spark can fade.
Right.
You get busy, distracted. Other things start to take priority.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
It's like we start going through the motions of faith, attending church, saying the prayers.
Right.
But our heart isn't really in it anymore. We've lost that sense of wonder, that joy, that deep connection we once felt.
Exactly. And I think that's a struggle a lot of people can relate to, especially in today's fast-paced, hyper-connected world. It's so easy to get caught up in the busyness of life and forget what truly matters.
You know, I've actually been feeling that myself lately.
Yeah.
I'm checking off all the boxes, doing all the right things, but I'm missing that fire,
Yeah.
that passion I used to have.
You know, it's interesting you say that because in the letter to Ephesus,
Yeah.
Jesus doesn't condemn them for doing bad things, but for leaving their first love. It's a subtle but important distinction.
Okay.
Sometimes it's not our sins that separate us from God, but our distractions.
Wow. That's a powerful insight. So if we've lost that first love, how do we get it back?
Right.
What are some practical steps we can take to rekindle that flame?
Well, the first step is to remember what that first love felt like. Think back to the time
Okay.
when your faith was fresh and vibrant. What drew you to God in the first place? What experiences filled you with joy and wonder?
Oh, for me, it was this overwhelming sense of peace and belonging. Like I'd finally found my place in the world, my purpose, my identity.
It's beautiful. And I think that sense of belonging is at the heart of what it means to have a relationship with God. It's not just about following rules or adhering to doctrines. It's about finding our true home, our true selves in Him.
So how do we reclaim that sense of belonging? Is it about going back to those initial experiences, trying to recreate those moments of joy and wonder?
It's not necessarily about recreating the past,
Okay.
but about rediscovering those core values, those essential truths that first drew you to God.
Right.
It's about stripping away the distractions, the busyness, the noise of everyday life,
Yeah.
and getting back to the basics.
So it sounds like we need to create space in our lives for stillness, for reflection, for simply being present with God.
Exactly. And that might mean different things for different people. For some, it might be spending time in nature. For others, it might be through music or art. The key is to find what helps you connect with God on a deeper level, to tap back into that source of love and joy that you once experienced.
So it's not about adding more things to our to-do list,
Right.
but about making space for the things that truly nourish our souls,
Yes.
the things that remind us of who we are and whose we are.
Precisely. And that's where the letter to the church in Laodicea comes in.
Okay.
Remember how Jesus describes them as lukewarm?
Oh, yeah.
Neither hot nor cold.
Yeah.
He says he'd rather they were one or the other because lukewarmness is a symptom of apathy, of indifference.
Yeah, it's a pretty harsh image being spit out of God's mouth. But I guess it makes sense if we're not passionate about our faith.
Yeah.
If we're just going through the motions, then what's the point?
Exactly. And I think
Yeah.
that's a challenge for all of us, especially in a world that's constantly vying for our attention. We're bombarded with messages telling us to consume, to achieve, to distract ourselves. It's so easy to become lukewarm, to lose that fire, that zeal for the things that truly matter.
So how do we combat that lukewarmness? How do we move from apathy to passion, from going through the motions to living with intention and purpose?
Yeah, it feels like we're talking about like a complete rewiring
Yeah.
of our priorities and mindsets.
Like,
It's not just about doing more or trying harder. It's about a fundamental shift in how we approach life itself.
you hit the nail on the head. It's about aligning our desires, our ambitions, our very being with God's will. It's about letting His love and His purpose flow through us, transforming us from the inside out.
And that brings us back to that powerful image of Christ in chapter 1.
Right.
The eyes like fire, the voice like rushing water. Maybe that intensity isn't meant to scare us, but to wake us up, to jolt us out of our complacency and remind us who we're dealing with.
That's a brilliant insight. It's like that vision is a divine alarm clock shaking us out of our spiritual slumber and calling us to attention. You know, it's a reminder that we're not just playing games here. We're engaging with the King of Kings, the one who holds the keys to life and death. Yeah, it's like suddenly seeing the world in high definition, realizing the depth and the weight of every choice we make.
Yeah,
It makes those warnings about being lukewarm all the more urgent, doesn't it?
absolutely. It's a call to action, a challenge to examine every area of our lives and ask ourselves, am I truly living for God or am I just going through the motions?
And that personal testimony we talked about, the person whose life was transformed by reading Revelation, maybe that's what they experienced.
Yeah.
A sudden awakening, a realization that they were sleepwalking through life and
Yeah.
missing out on something truly extraordinary.
It's like they finally saw the world and themselves through God's eyes, and everything changed. And that's the power of revelation. It has the potential to completely reorient our perspective, to shift our focus from the temporal to the eternal.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these first 3 chapters, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
Okay.
What's the one thing you hope they'll remember long after this is over?
I think it comes down to this. Don't be afraid to face the fire. Don't shy away from the intensity of Revelation's message. Let it burn away the distractions, the complacency, the lukewarmness that's holding you back.
Embrace the challenge, the urgency, the call to wake up and live a life that truly matters, a life that's on fire for God.
And remember, you're not alone in this journey. You have the power of the Holy Spirit within you, guiding you, strengthening you, and empowering you to overcome any obstacle. And you have a community of believers, people who are walking this path alongside you, offering encouragement and support.
So let those letters to the 7 churches be your guide, your mirror, your source of inspiration. Find your personal message within their words and let it ignite a fire in your heart that can never be extinguished.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the book of Revelation. May its message challenge you, inspire you, and transform you from the inside